Joining me is my good friend is Johnny Burtka. He's the president and CEO of ISI, the Intercollegiate Studies Institute. But for our purposes, he's the author of a brand new book that we have here in front of us. Gateway to Statesmanship is the selections from Xenophon to Churchill. It's been edited with an intro by you, Johnny. So it's great to see you, my friend. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Saagar.
All right, so why did you decide to assemble this book? What is the purpose behind a book about statesmen? As if there hasn't been a million already. Why this is?
It's pretty simple, but you say there's been a million, but in America we have this genre of self-help books for entrepreneurs. There's a million of them. Right. Peter Thiel's 0 to 1. Jim Collins' Good to Great, but nothing really comparable exists for statesmen. We have a lot of books about historic statesmen, but this book is really a collection of practical self-help leadership advice that was presented to political leaders going all the way back to antiquity in East and West, really connecting the world of theory to the world of action so that they can better govern their country.
So who are some of the people that are included in here? You have Xenophon to Churchill, so there's a lot of people in between that, so give us a taste of some of the people we're pulling from.
Absolutely. So in the ancient world, I have Han Fei, who's an ancient Chinese legalist.
All right.
In India, I have Kautilya, who wrote a book, the Arthashastra, which I've included selections from. And then in the Middle Ages, I have Gopatus's letters to Justinian the Great. I have some Thomas Aquinas in there. And of course, as we get to the Renaissance, we have Machiavelli, Thomas More, and Erasmus. And then I brought the tradition up to date and included some Churchill and de Gaulle and Theodore Roosevelt.
I'm a big de Gaulle fan. We may be controversial, but I think he was a very, very interesting leader. So if we're going to look through the book and we're going to consider this, were great statesmen made by the moment? Did they rely on a lot of previous? Churchill, for example, is very well read. He probably could quote, by many accounts, could quote Roman poetry off the top of his head. I don't think de Gaulle was as educated as him per se. Roosevelt certainly, you know, he was of a patrician class, but he was more of an instinctual type of leader. So what is it? Do you have to read self-help advice? Like, do you need a book like this? Do, some don't? And why do we not seem to have as many statesmen today as we did back in the past?
Yeah, so really a great statesman arises when two things intersect. Virtue on one hand, that's, you know, the moral, the intellectual qualities, but on the other hand, fortune has to align with their particular moment.
True.
If George Washington was born 10 years earlier or 10 years later, we might not know his name. America might not exist as it does today.
Sure.
But take someone like Charles de Gaulle, who you mentioned that you're a fan of. So de Gaulle actually wrote this book called The Edge of the Sword, and I've included the selection in there. And he wrote this book when he was in his early 30s. He hadn't accomplished anything in life. He sat during World War I as a prisoner of war and mostly drank coffee, smoked cigarettes, and wrote old books. And so he sat down and he actually articulated the qualities that he wanted to see in an ideal political leader. And he had this profound sense that he would one day lead and rule France. And then the political moment aligned, and he, of course, led the resistance to the Nazi invasion, founded the Fifth French Republic, and served as its president for 10 years. So there's a delicate interplay between harnessing fortune for your political rise.
Why do you think we don't have that many good statesmen? You had an interesting question, I remember, on Twitter. You're like, who's the last living statesman? And I said, I can't come up with a single answer. I think Kissinger was the last great one that we had. You can hate him, you can love him, but he had a coherent ideology. He was very well rooted. He had accomplished a lot in his life, again, whether it was, you know, good and or bad. Everybody else just seemed to kind of be bumbling along. I mean, even some of the bigger mistakes that have been made, you know, Iraq and all, that was not part of a grand ideological project, at least per se, in a Kissingerian sense. So what is it? Why is in the last 30 years we have no great statesmen?
Sure, I think there's really two reasons. One, at the beginning of the progressive era, this is going back 100 years ago, there was a shift away from statesmanship, classically understood, to management, expertise, bureaucracy. So the art of the statesman has been lost. And then secondly, I think it really comes to our educational system. If you go back to the education of Cyrus, describing Xenophon's education, right, he was raised in almost a Spartan culture. I'm not saying we should bring back that level of rigor, but basically they taught him the principle of restraint, self-control, mastery of self from a very young age, and that played a big role in his shaping his leadership abilities. Today, we really don't read any old books, any classic books. We don't teach students to think or to write the way that we do. And I think we saw this recently with the controversy at Harvard and so many other elite universities.
That's a good point. That's a good point. So you write, leadership requires painting a beautiful portrait of the world that you would like to inhabit and installing confidence that you are the best person to make it a reality. In an age where truth and goodness have lost their potency, beauty, and as wiser minds have noted, could save the world. So how do you bring that back in an era where, look, institutional education is not coming back in any sense? Is it just to read books like this at scale? How do you recreate it?
Yeah, well, I think that quote on beauty is really important. It's something that gets lost. I think a lot of conservatives in particular tend to over-intellectualize politics. They think if you get the ideas right, if you get the policies right, then you'll be a great leader, right? And that's not really how it works. Great leaders throughout history have been builders of beautiful things. I go back to Justinian the Great. He built the Hagia Sophia.
Yes, that's right.
This is a structure that is around 1,500 years later, and he coupled that beauty because he knew that most people, they're not persuaded by logic. They want that big, compelling story. That's why a Lincoln or an FDR were such successful presidents, even a Reagan. And so I think it comes back to that storytelling and to painting that beautiful vision that can really capture the imagination of the next generation.
All right. Well, it's a treat to actually have something like this on. So it's Gateway to Statesmanship, selections from Xenophon to Churchill. We'll have a link down in the description. Everybody go and buy it. It's good to see you, my friend.
Thanks again.
Thanks for watching.
Hey guys, if you like that video, go to breakingpoints.com, become a premium subscriber, and help us build the best independent media organization on the planet.
That's right. We're subscriber funded. We're building something new. We want to replace these failing mainstream media organizations.
So again, to subscribe, it's breakingpoints.com.